Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Have you ever wondered what it means to be fluent? I know that I come across this all the time with students or parents that come telling me that they're fluent in a language and then they proceed to tell me a couple words and can't say anything else in that language. Um, is that fluent? Hi, this is Spencer with Learning English with Spencer. And before we get started on today's video, just want to remind you that down below you can hit the closed captioning and see text of what I'm saying throughout the video. Additionally, down below in the information, you're able to um, answer questions to a quiz, and they will go throughout the video, the questions, and you can rewatch and watch and pause and answer the questions, and that will both help you with your auditory retention, so your listening retention, but as well, it can help you in your reading as well. So, what does it mean to be fluent? This is something that I ask my students every single year as I teach them, and I get different responses every single year. Now, fluency can vary widely based off of individuals and the perspective of language. So instead of talking about fluency, which for some it can be a couple of words, some a couple of phrases, others enough to travel, let's frame fluency instead as proficiency in a language. Now, with proficiency, everything's going to depend on what you need the language for. So, for example, we're this channel is all about learning English. What do you need English for? Is it a casual hobby? Is it something that you need for schooling? Is it something you need for traveling? Is it something that you need for your work? Or in other cases, is it something you need in a day to day survival if you're here in the United States? Once you're able to answer that question of what do you need English for, there are going to be some factors on how you learn English. Some of the things are going to be proximity, how close you are to the language, how accessible the language is to you, motivation. There's a difference between a desire saying, hey, I want to learn English, and the motivation of and the work ethic of I'm going to study this every single day and I'm going to practice every single day. Your previous exposure to the language is going to be a huge factor. The amount of time you're studying, etc. There's a lot of things that factor into language learning, and I can talk about that in another video. Once you know what you want to do with English, let's talk about proficiency skills. Now, proficiency is a high level of demonstrated skill, and a scale is a system of ordered measurement marks. So, a proficiency skill, it allows you as an individual to gain mastery in a certain domain and then move on to a more challenging skill. It's not that you'll never use that skill again, but it's that you've shown that you can use English in this case at a high level in introducing yourself or talking about your hobbies. And it's time to level up because you want to be able to talk in different tenses. That's a higher level skill than introducing yourself and talking about hobbies. Another example of that is saying hello uh, versus a high stakes multi-million dollar business still. They're very different uses of English, and they're very different skills. And a proficiency skill helps you identify what are the tasks and what are the abilities that an individual needs to use in lower levels of proficiency, while what are the skills and abilities that an individual needs to demonstrate in a higher level of ability? Something that is general in proficiency skills is at the different levels, they're showing the epitome or the best version or the standard of what that skill is. So it's not that saying no is not an argument, but it's saying that to give the standard of what an argument is, or to give an exemplar of what an argument is, that you're able to see things from two perspectives, that you're able to argue points that are not your own. Proficiency skills are about showing the exemplar of that skill at that level. Let's talk about different proficiency skills. If you are in the United States or you're connected with the United States, you'll probably want to go for ACTFL, the American Council on Teaching Foreign Language. They have scales that range from novice to intermediate, advanced, even up to superior and distinguished. If you're living in the United States or you're connecting with the United States, um, Hackful is a great way to go. I watch on the internet, and there's a lot of American generated content that promotes the next big proficiency scale. It's not one that I promote or that I'm familiar with, but it's the CEFR. The CEFR stands for the Common European Framework of Reference for Language. Now, um, the scale ranges from an A1 to an A2, a B1, a B2, a C1, and a C2. Now, the chances are, if you're watching my content, you're probably interested in US based English or being connected with the United States. The CEFR is used by Europe to assess language skills. Now, another scale that I'm familiar with is the WIDA, which is the World Class Instructional Design and Assessment. This is a proficiency scale that is based for students in the United States who are learning English or English language learners. And that scale goes from a 1 to a 6. Now, if you're an adult and you're learning English, you're probably not going to use the WIDA and their proficiency scale. Another proficiency scale that's out there is for the armed forces, for our military members, the ILR. Now, the ILR is the Interagency Language Roundtable, and that scales from a 0 to a 5. Now, if you're not part of the military or planning to go into the military, you're probably not going to use the ILR. Different countries and different languages might have their own proficiency scale. One that I'm familiar with or that I've had brief interactions with would be the HSK, which comes out of China. It is the scale for all foreign language learners who are trying to learn Mandarin Chinese. Now, the HSK stands for Hanyu Shui Ping Kao Shi, which I'm not going to pretend that I said that right. And they have about 3 different stages and 9 levels throughout that. Now, this channel is not about learning Mandarin Chinese, so we're going to skip past that to the others. Now, for the most part, proficiency skills are going to focus on the 4 domains: reading, writing, listening, and speaking, though those can vary across different countries and different languages. Now that we've talked about what proficiency is and how there are different proficiency scales out there, I did want to talk about how proficiency can vary. And even in L1, or as linguists refer to it, or our first language, proficiency can vary. And I want to give a couple examples of this. So, a couple of years ago, I decided I wanted to finish my basement at my house. Now, my proficiency with English construction terms was subpar. If you asked me to define what a flange was, I had a really difficult time. Now, as I was going along in that project, I watched video after video. I read information um, plenty, and I went through and I learned a lot of terms. Now, I took my construction terms in English from a very low knowledge to a very um, mediocre standard as far as construction is concerned. I took it from a low proficiency in talking about construction to a much higher level of proficiency in talking about construction. Am I the best at it? No. And that's the thing about understanding proficiency and native speakers is if you asked native speakers on all facets of news, all facets of the economy, all facets of professional fields, um, it would be hard, very difficult, if not impossible, to find a native speaker who could talk about all those levels of all those subjects, all those levels of their language. And it's not that they're not well educated, and it's not that they do not know their first language. It's simply that there's so much information out in the world that we can't use it all. And so we end up becoming proficient within our field of interest. So for me as a teacher, I can talk a lot about teaching, I can talk a lot about school, I can talk a lot about students. But when you get me into a situation, talk about construction, or you talk about um, parts of the economy or whatnot, I might struggle. That doesn't mean that I don't know English. It simply means that I can't be a professional in everything, and I can't be um, highly educated in everything. Now, I want to give a couple of examples of how proficiency can vary. When I was 19, I became a missionary, um, and as I was learning Spanish, I learned gospel Spanish. I learned how to read the scriptures. I learned how to talk about Jesus Christ. I learned how to speak church speak, or church speech, rather. And I could talk all about that, but I struggled in talk about day-to-day stuff. Now, my studies and my practice was for becoming a missionary, and so I got good at learning about that. At that time, had you asked me questions that we would consider basic, I probably would have struggled. The same happens with speakers here that are learning English. They might come to the United States and be fresh on their journey of learning English. And so they might be able to talk about English as far as getting around the store and a couple items in their job. And that's a starting point, and that's okay. Proficiency varies throughout the years, and as you get more experience, you'll be able to express yourself better and say more and do more within the language. One more example of how um, proficiency varies is how students are taught here in schools in the United States, how they're taught English throughout the United States. I had previously mentioned WIDA. WIDA assesses how students are doing in school, how they understand academic language and academic tests. For students who are young and going through school and learning English, um, WIDA is a great way to assess how a student is progressing in their schooling. The test emphasizes academic English, so that doesn't necessarily demonstrate how a student is doing outside of school or how they can talk about themselves and talk about the rest of society, but it has a laser focus within schooling, and students can get good at English within the schooling context and still be struggling outside of the schooling context with English. One last note that I want to mention about proficiency and proficiency scales is kind of the key point I probably want to get into my next video within this playlist is how you can use a proficiency scale to self-assess. This is something that it's a topic that I teach my students that I want them to know where they're at in their language ability and where they're headed. So that's what I plan on talking about in my next video in this playlist. If you're interested, please check it out. Thanks for watching this video. I appreciate you sticking with me the whole time. I just want you to remember that you're important, you're valued, and you can do this. Thanks.